Hi there. This is going to be one of two videos that I'm going to shoot on this project that I've been working on. I first wanted to talk about this retro computer game that I've been getting models to develop for myself. And I'm going to do another video that talks about the ChatGPT Codex uh, software usage. So getting the model to actually run software directly, either through MCP or the Model Context Protocol, or through just direct computer use, which is something that the ChatGPT Codex application allows you to do and is pretty much first in class. So if you want to learn more about how this technology works and how I have been using it, I'll put a link to that video. That's going to go on my Modern Democracy channel. This video, on the other hand, is going on my Retro channel. And I'm talking about my Ladybug game. So I have a few other videos that I've done on my channel, my Retro channel, in the last... I haven't done one in a couple of months just because I was dealing with some personal stuff. But the last couple of weeks, I've managed to get back into the development process using the newest ChatGPT models. So 5.6. For the first time, OpenAI has released 3 models at the same time. They're named Sol, Terra, and Luna, so after the sun, the earth, and the moon, supposed to be an evocative name that gives you an idea of which is the sort of the strongest model, which is Sol, and then Terra, and then Luna. For this particular project, I've been using pretty much Sol exclusively, and in particular, I've been using Sol at primarily medium reasoning. I have occasionally bumped up to high, and then once I've also been bumping it down to light. So that's just to give you an idea here. When you open up the ChatGPT desktop application, which is now what Codex used to be, you've got 2 options here, ChatGPT and Codex. Well, they've been changing this all. This used to, what is it? Does it say work? No, now it's just ChatGPT. Funny. They've been rebranding this. They've essentially used to have, I think, 3 applications, essentially desktop applications. There was the ChatGPT desktop application. There was Codex, which was the desktop application specifically for developers. And then I think they also had a web browser. They've folded those essentially everything into a single application now. And you can switch between the ChatGPT and the Codex versioning or application with this toggle. Now, when they released it, this used to say ChatGPT Work. Obviously, they're going through some real rethinking about how they're branding this stuff. But I believe the ChatGPT is essentially the same as Codex now, although it's got some slight tweaks to what's available to you as far as plugins is concerned. But it's still the big reason why to use the desktop app. If you've only used the web-based interface, the real big reasons for using a desktop application like this. And there's also Anthropic has their Claude Code, which is the same sort of tool. And then there's open source ones as well. But the real reason why to use these, or even they're both based off of a command line tool, which is sort of under the covers what they run. This is the GUI interface. But the real reason to use these tools on the desktop is it gives you access to your file system, so you can have a project that you can run all your conversations in, and it'll actually work through that folder and actually rewrite and update files, that sort of thing. Especially on the Codex side, and again, that's going to be the focus of this video, it also allows you to set up connections to software that has what's called a Model Context Protocol, or MCP plugin. Some of these MCP plugin connections are built into some of the professional software that's out there now. Some of these MCP connections are homebrews that people have made that sort of create an MCP standard interface on an already existing API. but essentially it's a way to get the model to directly control things. So I've currently used I have MCP connections on my other project where I've got it connecting to a Postgres database and also to QGIS, which is like a graphical editor for mapping data. So it can actually query the database, push content in, create or manage tables and relationships. It can also, on the QGIS, connect to layers, add them onto a map, and do mapping and visualization, and even take screenshots and put them into the chat. The one MCP connection that I'm using for this is the GDB-MCP, which is I believe it's just an independent developer who's built it on top of the XRoar emulator. And the XRoar emulator is primarily the Tandy Colour Computer or Tandy Computer. I'm not sure if it does TRS-80, but it does Tandy Colour Computers 1, 2, 3, the MC10. In Britain, you had, well, in Wales, you had the Dragon 32. I'm not sure if it does Dragon 64, but Alice. So there's a whole bunch of sort of Tandy Radio Shack allowed the same specifications to get published by different companies in some other countries. In particular, like I said, in Wales and in Brazil, there were Tandy clones, although they're not exactly compatible. At least the Dragon has a different memory map, but it's all the same hardware. But I'm using XRoar as my emulator for the Coco 3. I'm also using MAME for my emulator for the target video arcade game that I'm trying to do as close to possible arcade accurate port of this game called Ladybug, which was one of the many Pac-Man clones that came out shortly after Pac-Man in the early 80s. Ladybug's one of my favorite of this era, and it's originally ran on a Z80 processor with a fairly comparable video chip to what's in the Tandy Colour Computer line. In particular, there's a pretty good matching resolution and graphics with the Colour Computer 3, which has some advanced video modes that weren't available in the Coco 1 and 2. So I'm targeting the Coco 3, and previously I had been using Claude Code with the paid model on that to do my development work. Again, a little background for this. I started doing, this is sort of the third game that I've got in development right now related to the Coco 3. I started off doing one called Stocks and Bonds, which was based off of an Avalon Hill board game that's a very sort of number crunchy. It's all just basically buying and selling stocks on the stock market. And the interface for that is just terminal based. So it was my effort at trying to learn programming for the Colour Computer 3, and in particular for the third-party operating system called Nitro OS 9 and the ease of use edition of that, which is still in active development by hobbyists. And it's sort of a Unixy POSIX-style operating system for an 8-bit processor, which is fairly unique and quite powerful. And I wanted to learn how to code for that operating system and for the Coco 3 and for Basic 09, which is the sort of advanced version of Basic that's available for that platform. Anyway, long story short, I got pretty close to complete, but I ran into memory issues, and I was really kind of struggling with trying to get the model to fix the issues around. I was just kept running out of memory. You only have access to 64K of RAM on a Coco 3 at any given time, although the memory on a Coco 3 can be upgraded. Well, at the time it was upgradable to 512K. I think the base install was 128, but I'm targeting 512 minimum. And even in modern hardware upgrades, you can upgrade up to 2 megabytes of memory. So then I went and started working on a Coco 3 port of Mule, and still targeting NitroOS 9 and using C. So there's a DCC implementation of C for the NitroOS 9. And that one, again, I ran into memory issues and trying to bite off more than I could chew, I think. And also it's part that the models had limitations that I'm finding are less so now. In fact, I don't even think are really there with the current version of Sol as a sort of TLDR. Once I started to hit stumbling blocks on that game, I decided I wanted to really simplify and get much more comfortable with the Coco 3 hardware. And so remove the NitroOS 9 was just this additional complication on top of, I had never done Coco 3 development before. I didn't have a Coco 3 when I was growing up. I had a Coco 2 and an MC10. Started with the MC10 and then we upgraded to the Coco 2 at some point. So Coco 3 has a new video chip and some more functionality and more memory capabilities and things. So it's a more powerful system. It was meant as a replacement for the 1 and 2, but it didn't last very long, mostly because it came out roughly around the same time as the Amiga and the Atari ST, and the 16-bit generation was basically there or on the horizon. And also Tandy Radio Shack moved on around the same time to IBM clones. And so it was always kind of a technological dead end, but because it's still got a very passionate hobbyist following, there's been a fair bit of active development on it in recent years. So that's my long-winded introduction. The game is Ladybug. I've did start work on this shortly before I took my bit of a 2-month break. And where I got with Claude Code was what you can see here on the screen. These are the sprites from the actual arcade game. So there's actually 2 sets. We've got, these are black and white, but there's these are the tiles for the game. So this is the maze tiles, text tiles, and everything that's basically part of the actual arcade. These are the coin indicators when you're on the track screen. And then there's also the sprites, which represent the different enemies, and the main characters. So these are the animations for the Ladybug itself. These are the sprites for the level 1 enemy, level 2 enemy. I can't remember if this is level 3 or this is level 3, but level 3 and 4, then 5, then 6. And level 7 is the last enemy here. No, level 8. And then once you get past level 8, it starts to mix and match them, so you start getting a combination. Although I don't think there's any difference in logic in the arcade game between these. It's just different graphics. And then there's also the death animation. So whenever you die by either hitting a poison skull or colliding with an enemy, you slowly shrink down to a dot, and then you turn into these little angel wings and then fly up the screen. And then there's also these vegetables, which are bonus items. Once all the enemies have spawned, you get 4 enemies per maze. In the spawner in the middle of the map, you'll see the vegetable for that particular level, and these are all the different levels that are available in the game. And when you collect that vegetable, it freezes all the enemies for a fixed period of time, and I think it's probably 5-10 seconds, something in that area. I also don't know why there's this lizard. I don't know if this is just unimplemented content or if there's some secret animation or bonus screen that I have not been able to find any reference to, but there's this dinosaur graphic that obviously, like you can see, there's a front facing and then side facing, and it's got, and there's a bone. I don't know what the bone is for. And then on the tiles, there's also this castle and some trees and stuff, and then there's musical notes on a staff. I don't know that any of this stuff is actually in the game itself. I just find it, I'm kind of curious as to what all this was. If anybody happens to know, please leave it in the comments below if you've seen these graphics in the arcade game. But so as of yet, I've yet to see any of this show up in the game footage that I've watched or the game that I've played. But inside of the tiles is basically the maze I'm more concerned about, and like I said, some of the lettering, and then some of these for bonus scores that show up in the game. Let me fire up the actual game briefly, just so you can see what the game looks like as the arcade. If you've never played Ladybug, this is what the arcade actually looks like. So I put in a coin, and then I hit 1 to play. And you start off with your first Ladybug position, and then you have control over it. So basically, there's these gates that rotate, and then you can pick up these bonuses that you'll notice at the top of the screen. There's special, extra, and then the 2 times multiplier. When you pick up the symbol, so if I pick up the hearts, they match the bonuses on the left, and if they're blue, they multiply everything else that you pick up for that maze. Just wait. There, here's my bonus. So the enemies will spawn in the middle when this. You see that timer that's going around as a boss. Every time that goes a full loop, it launches one of the enemies. If the enemy lands in one of those poison skulls, they die. And then your goal is to pick up these letters. So I want to pick up that T when it turns yellow, which it should turn right after it's red. So there we go. And I can also go for the E if I can get it when it's yellow or red. A and E are letters for both special and extra. If you collect the extra, you get a free life. If you collect the special, you unlock a bonus vegetable screen, apparently. That's something I actually haven't done in the arcade. Or, basically you're just trying to pick up all these pellets, clear the mapping, and those bonus collectibles. You want to do all of that to end the level. If they all spawn, which they should all do here in a second, once it goes one more loop around, I'm going to come down here, just try to get access to the bonus just to show you. Oh, I got it. And that's the death animation. I don't have that one exactly right yet, but when the enemy does, and you can't die while it's not spawned, but essentially in this box here, you'll see that little cucumber. If you pick it up, you can see in the bottom left of the screen here, when you pick that up, it freezes all the enemies in place, and then you can sort of keep going. So when you complete it, you go to the next level. It goes, so it switches the vegetable to eggplant, and now there's a different enemy. But again, like I said, I think the logic is basically the same. That's basically the game, and then you just go through each level. It just gets a little more complicated, and then there's a putting in your name kind of thing. So there's, let's go down over here. So all you do is just enter in your name, and you've actually got, I think, about 10 letters or something. And that's it. That's Ladybug. Okay, so now I'm going to stop this, and then I'm going to show you my version of Ladybug as it is right now. I just had to do a little bit of setup to get this working properly. So this is my game. As you can see, the maze is almost a perfect reproduction of the game, with the one big exception being that the special, extra, and multipliers are on the left, and the scores and stuff and the life counters are on the right, because the maze itself takes up the entire vertical space, whereas before on the arcade these 3 would be up here, and then this stuff would all be down along the bottom. So I've got this pretty much working, with one exception being that the enemies are not moving properly yet. So let me just show you, and there's also no sound. And the other thing is that it doesn't have the attract screen, any of sort of the bonus stuff, the enter your name at the end. This is just the gameplay that I've been focusing on, but it's the bulk of the game. But I do have my gates working. Oh, is that a bug? I think there's a bug sometimes on some of these gates, but it actually does work pretty much arcade perfect as far as controls go. Oh, yeah, so it collided there. You can see the animation for that. That's dead, but it does do even the little animation of the Ladybug leaving. It'll begin because they are on the side of the screen. I have to go off screen and then come back on. Here, let me go over here just to pick that up. Oh, and there's a bug that pellet's not getting picked up. But like I said, there's little bugs here and there. Pardon the pun, I guess. But it is pretty much arcade perfect, other than those little idiosyncrasies. Like I said, it's got the spawner there. If I do collide with the enemies, it'll reset. Oh, yeah, so there we go. There it reset. So I've still got a bit of polish to do, and the biggest piece of functionality is, other than the sound right now, is getting the enemies actually wandering the maze and trying to follow the same sort of approach that the same sort of logic that the arcade does. I've built all of this in the space of a weekend. So there we go, and it just resets and it goes on the next level. So I'm still using the same enemies. It doesn't actually show the proper enemy progression right now, but again, that's a pretty minor thing. It's just a matter of switching out the sprites. As for, like I said, as far as I can tell, the logic for the enemy movement is exactly the same regardless of which enemy it is. It's just a way to sort of visually indicate what level you're on. Anyway, so I'd probably only need another weekend or so to do the polish and clean up and have this ready for availability for anybody who wants to download it. As long as you've got a Coco 3 with at least, yeah, actually, even this one would probably work in a Coco 3 with even just the minimum 128K of RAM, because I should be able to build this in less than even 64K. Certainly I was looking at the Ladybug ROMs for the arcade, and it totals about 41K of memory. And so I'm kind of targeting somewhere in the same area. In fact, I only got up past the 16K limit yesterday, and at that point I had everything but enemies on screen. So I'm pretty confident I'll be able to get this in about 60K full of RAM, but you are going to have to use the Coco 3 because of, I believe, the video graphics mode that this uses is only Coco 3. It's only on the Gimme chip. But yeah, so I think that's good enough for the demo. Like I said, there's still a few tweaks to do here and there. There's a little bit of flicker with the sprite occasionally that I haven't fully troubleshooted yet. And like I said, there's a few minor bugs, but as you can see, the animation, and because I gotta get that little heart thing so it does more of a swoop. But I'm getting really close to actually having this thing fully implemented, which, like I said, it's just impressive that I was able to get Sol to do this all in the space of 2 days. And well, I'm doing this on the lowest paid plan, $20, $25, I think it is a month Canadian. I think it's $20 US. And on Sol Medium with a little bit of Sol Low and a little bit of Sol High, I burned through 2 weeks worth of tokens. I've just, this particular, since Sol got out, and I think Anthropic's doing the same thing right now as well, but I'm not paying for that one currently. They've been doing 2 things to kind of promote people testing out these models. In particular, I think because if you go into the higher end use of the Codex models, you get, you burn through your tokens, your weekly allowance, and even your 5-hour allowance. Oh, yeah. So both Anthropic and OpenAI have placed 2 types of limits on their models. You have a 5-hour limit and a weekly limit. Your 5-hour limit is meant to be to kind of prevent too much access to too much hammering of the same model servers all at once, and the weekly is kind of doing the same thing, but at a weekly level, which means you're only allowed so much inference, so much generation of tokens per week. And at the $20 to $25 model price range, if you're doing Sol, medium, or high, you're going to burn through that. You can burn through it as I've been doing in a day, depending on what it is that you're doing. Now, on the other work that I've been doing with the municipal stuff, I actually didn't burn through. I've been kind of doing it at about the same pace, staying at Sol, medium, and low, mostly low with a little bit of medium. I can stretch that out to pretty much get 1 week's worth of tokens, will last me about a week of pretty full-time development. And especially with that work in particular, a lot of the time is it'll write a script and then it'll run the script, and while it's running code, it's not doing any inference, so you can sort of stretch things out. With this work, though, because the model is doing all the coding, the only part that it's not inferring, and even that I think it is doing inference, because it's basically let me switch over to my screen share here, and I'll be right back. Before I go any further, let me again just kind of talk about what I think I didn't fully go into detail what I was meaning to say. So since Sol, Terra, Luna came out, and I believe, like I said, with Fable, which is sort of the competitive model that Anthropic has released, they've both been doing two things pretty regularly over the last few weeks. One is, so if you go to your usage remaining, you can see there's a weekly reset on July 26th. They've been resetting it much more frequently than once a week. I've gotten essentially a free reset it seems to have been every 2, 3, 4 days. So the last reset for me was on Saturday. So I actually got, when it does a reset, you go, no matter how much usage you've done, it resets back to 100% for the week. So they've been doing that quite a bit. Plus, they've also granted you, at least on the OpenAI side, these full resets. And they've been granting one of these pretty much once a week. So between the combination of getting access to free resets, and I've got 3 queued here that as long as I use it before the end of July, I've got a full reset at my fingertips, which will reset. I'm currently at a weekly usage limit of 0. I burned out all my tokens for the second time on this project. But I'm going to wait until tomorrow morning. I've got lots of other things I can do. So basically, I'm going to wait and see in the morning if I get a reset. They tend to be doing the reset overnight. So if you are currently subscribed, go and play with the stuff actively. Burn out your weekly usage. The other thing that OpenAI has done that I don't think Anthropic has done is they've temporarily disabled the 5-hour limit. So normally, when you've got the 5-hour limit, which is usually about a quarter to a fifth of your total weekly limit, you can only spend, at least historically, you've only been able to go through your weekly limit in about 4 or 5 maximum chunks or minimum chunks, where once you've burned about 20 to 25% of your weekly usage, you're stopped, and then you have to wait until that 5-hour window closes. And usually the windows start as soon as you start prompting. It'll count 5 hours from that, and then it'll reset and let you burn more of your weekly usage. Since Sol was released, they pulled that 5-hour window, disabled it. So now the only limit you have is your weekly usage limit. That means that you can also burn through your weekly usage limit a lot faster, but it also means that you're not stopped. So I spent this weekend basically burning through this all day, and I had to do a manual reset for the first time in a while on Sunday morning after I checked that there was no free reset, which there had been on Saturday. Saturday was a free reset. So I've actually burned through my weekly usage limit 3 times in the last 3 days. So if you are, like I said, this is a little helpful tip. If you are currently subscribed, now is a great time to really kick these models and try and see what you can do with them and burn through your tokens, because you're either probably going to get a weekly reset, at least if the pattern holds for the foreseeable future. You're going to get a weekly reset you're not going to have to wait the full week for the weekly reset, and you will also probably get a full reset grant. In fact, I got 2 back-to-back here a few days ago, about a week or so ago. So like I said, I've spent 1, so I had 4 up until yesterday. Okay, back to how I'm using this. The first thing I did these are all the conversations since I started picking this up. I started off, because again, I hadn't touched this code in about 2 months. So I just simply asked, what's the current state of this project? Oh, also, I was really having problems, just to kind of review where I was with Claude Code's Opus 4.8, I think is the latest version. That was the latest model when I was using the paid Anthropic's subscription. And I was able to get it to ingest just to, again, refresh what I did to set this project up. In the docs folder, I've got the assembly language programming for the Coco 1 and assembly language programming for the Color Computer and the Coco 3. That's what I've got. So the Coco, or the Color Computer, this is one of, I think, what generally is considered one of the best manuals to learn how to write assembly. So as I mentioned before, my other two projects were Basic 09 and C. Because I'm going just to the bare hardware, the best programming language to really get the most out of the computer is assembly. And so first thing that I did, and I think I did a video on this, but if not, here's a quick little overview, is I took the PDF that's available on the Coco archive. It's a website out there that's free to get all sorts of manuals and documents about programming for all sorts of the Tandy Colour Computer platforms, like the Coco 1 and 2 and 3 and the MC10, and Dragon, I think, is in there too, and the compatibles. So I took the PDFs, did an OCR because they're just scanned pages, pulled the text out, did a massive format in Markdown format, and published them onto this wiki. And again, there'll be a link to the project below if you want to get feel free to grab those two Markdown documents and use them for your own purposes if you'd like. But basically, I took those two. So the assembly language program for the Color Computer covers the Coco 1 and 2. The assembly language programming for the Coco 3 is the addendum document that only talks about the differences between the Coco that were in the Coco 3 that weren't in the Coco 1 and 2. So that's the gimme chip and some of the advanced memory management where you can do bank switching for 64K of memory. Because the original system only had a maximum of 64K, the Coco 3 gets around that issue by essentially having banks of 64K that you can swap in and out as the active page of memory, and gives you larger access to, for a small performance cost, essentially. You can have access to a lot larger total amount of memory, but still in 64K chunks. So this covers all that sort of the additional stuff. So the first thing that I did in the earlier projects was I got it to ingest those and put them into the wiki. And this is basically, it's part of the agents document and the Claude document, which is still here. But this is basically with Codex, you've got a root agents file or a root Claude file, both Markdown documents, that either ChatGPT or Claude, the Claude models like Opus or Sonnet or Fable, will look for instructions on how to behave within the context of this project. And one of the first things that I've got in here is about the wiki. So it's LLM maintained, hand authored HTML wiki. In this case, is HTML. I borrowed this from this researcher called, I think his name, I've forgotten what his name is. Anyway, he had this idea about using a Markdown-based wiki. For this project, I was also experimenting, so I got it to I think I started with a Markdown, and I got it to convert it to HTML just because I wanted to have the wiki available through a browser. And that's partly because of I got to a dead end. I essentially got it to build my wiki here, so you can see. Let me open this up. So inside we've got in a folder for the game where we've got sort of an overview of what the game is. Let me switch this over to a browser. So we've got game design, and then the design document talks about the actual game that we're developing here. And then implementation, we've got, let's switch this. So we've got our roadmap, coding conventions, memory map, video mode, tile format and static maze, scheduler, lessons learned, emulated. So lessons learned is where it learns things. XRoar monitor protocol. So that's part of what I was trying to do. Essentially, I got it to pull all the Coco stuff. So there is platform. Yeah, let's go to platform. So we've got cartridge documentation, coding conventions, timing, tooling. Oh, so I'm using LW tools to assemble the binary that turns into the cartridge ROM, and toolshed to do disk manager. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm using toolshed for this because I'm building a ROM. But you can use toolshed for things like file OS and that sort of thing if you're writing to floppy disks or to hard disks that are available to the Coco. And then I also had a web app Docker, so and then XRoar. So again, to kind of recap where I left off. So Opus 4.8 was giving me some basic cartridge. I was just doing some initial testing to like, okay, so create a cartridge image and then write some stuff onto screen. And I got stuck at the step where I wanted to take sprites from the sprite images. Where's that? Under assets. So I was trying to take some of these images, or actually probably one of the colored ones, but they're the same images. Some of them have colors inferred, and I'm just using the black and white ones as a reference. What I was trying to do was to get one of the tiles from this tile sheet and stamp it onto several spots on the screen, and it kept having problems, and it couldn't figure out how to get the sprites representing correctly. And so I went down to a bit of a wild goose chase where I started to build my own internal hooks into XRoar and build that into a web-based sort of a monitoring tool where I could actually put breakpoints and step through and see a screen output and actually walk through the assembly code through the emulator, which there isn't really a tool for the Coco to be able to do that. And I made some decent progress with it, but again, as I was kind of spinning up on that is when I stopped developing for a couple of months. So the long story short, when I came back to this and got it to kind of look at this, I got it to review the current state. And then I said, fix all commit readiness findings and rerun the verification duty. So it basically, I got it to try and troubleshoot some of the MCP stuff and that sort of thing. But this is where I really got things moving and unblocked. There was this, so again, Opus identified this cartridge gap defect where there was a certain part of memory. Essentially what it was trying to do is when the cartridge loaded, it was trying to copy all the cartridge ROM code into RAM. And it kept running into this corruption issue. And I think now, having gotten past the blocker, I think it's just the idiosyncrasies of the way that the Coco, even the Coco 1 and 2 handles cartridges, and there's certain parts of memory that you can't copy into. And I think that's what the original code was trying to do, was copy into a block of memory that then got overwritten by the Coco hardware when it tried to start running. And so I was getting corrupted memory, video memory. And so anyway, I got this. I switched to Sol and did this. Oh, I think I did this on high. I said, in the last conversation, you mentioned that the mandatory cartridge gap padding. Yeah. So this was referencing that bug that Opus initially said that this is why, that there's some bug with the XRoar emulator. I don't think it is a bug with the XRoar emulator anymore, but that's kind of how it was reasoning. It ended up being, I think, a hallucination. But anyway, it turns out that, like I said, I think it was just a misunderstanding on the model side of how the Coco hardware worked when you boot a cartridge. So I got this to do a little dig into if it's still an issue, and it got it to look at the XRoar source, which has got downloaded as part of the project, to detect why it's got this defect. And it said it's not an XRoar cartridge read defect. So the Coco 3 reset basic ROM, copies the cartridge region into RAM, then explicitly patches this black block of memory with this jump command and some bytes of data. The live snapshot containing this patch at physical RAM here, while the cartridge file still contains zeros. So changing the XRoar's approximate cartridge FIRQ timing from 100 milliseconds to 1 microsecond did not change the results. It's reproducing the reset ROM behavior. It does have separate cartridge copy limitation, with TY equals 0 as decoder selects CTS while leaving RAS inactive. This is pretty low level. If you got to really understand, if you read those assembly documents, it'll make a lot of sense. But if don't worry if you're not following this. I got it to remove this obsolete workaround and correct the comment, as XRoar is built by hobbyists who have a pretty intimate understanding of the Coco hardware. I'm assuming the original hardware also reflects this behavior. I still haven't got a chance to verify this with Coco and the Coco SDC, but I got to speculate on why this behavior might exist, and it gave me a speculation. Which again, you can freeze and read this if you like, but basically uses mutually exclusive chip selection signals. So I think it was a chip signaling issue, actually. And then, so then I was going back to this web app monitoring tool that I created, and I got it to clean up the wiki documentation project, the wiki and the project documentation, because there was definitely some stale data there. So I went and cleared that up. It also says you resolved the cartridge ROM sprite. So at this point, it had gotten around that perceived issue. I told it to put the web code aside and let's just focus on the cartridge. So now my rocker, again, I didn't do anything other than tell Sol to look at this project and then look at the specific issue that Opus had identified and verify with the XRoar source to see if that really was an issue. And it said, no, it probably wasn't. And then it came out with an alternative solution to get sprites appearing on screen, and it did. And so now I was like, okay, well then I don't need that monitor anymore. I can just focus on building the cartridge. So that's where I started doing my my implementation. So in this document, so basically, phase 0 was the hello cart. It was just a create the cartridge and get it to boot. Phase 1 was booting it and do some low-level hardware calls. Phase 2 was where I got stuck, which was doing video mode and character output and trying to get sprites and text on screen. I was blocked somewhere early on this. Once it got past that, I just got to start working on, so I started with 2.6. So I blocked on this one here, the automated selected file and target gap palette generation. So I was grabbing the tile set and palette and generating a sprite. So then, this is where we got to. So doing glyphs, so getting tiles from those tile sheets images, it started putting them into memory in the ROM and then displaying them on screen. So then all I did basically was continue with phase 2.6. In fact, this is again using the suggestions. So that is part of my instructions in my settings under configure or personalization. Here, this is the one. Response end. End every reply with suggested next prompts in fence code blocks. So use the minimum number that fits the topic. So if it's a simple topic, it's going to give me one prompt. If it's something with 2 clear follow-up paths, it'll give me 2, and 3 if it's a broad topic with 3 distinct follow-up paths. And that's why I see these. You won't see this unless you have that type of instruction in your personalization of your ChatGPT model. And you can use this in the web browser as well. But again, I have this in my Codex instructions. At this point, it's mostly all I do is copy that block, paste it into the chat window for the next step, which is what I did here, and hit enter. And it works on to the next step because I've already got a roadmap and I've already got clear sets of work that I want to do. So then it started to do phase 3 tile format, and then so this is the other part that I hadn't gotten to before, and this really supercharged my ability to do this work. I mentioned that I have the Ladybug installed in my MAME folder in my Ubuntu installation using WSL in Windows. So with Windows, you can not run a version of Linux as a sort of a secondary operating system under what's called WSL. And so I have MAME installed on Ubuntu, and that's how I had been doing my Coco 3 emulation before I started switching to XRoar to try it, because I found XRoar has some nice features and it works a little, the audio's less janky. But MAME is a multiple arcade machine emulator. That's what MAME stands for. So it specializes in emulating arcade cabinets if you have the ROMs. So I've got the Ladybug ROM, which I've installed as one of the ROMs in MAME. So if I just type MAME Ladybug, which is what I showed at the start of this video, it will load the arcade ROM. And so you get an arcade perfect version of it. Now, the nice thing about MAME is that it has this Lua API, which allows you low-level access to the emulated hardware. So you can look at the RAM and the ROM, and you can even, I think, halt the processor and step and do all that sort of monitoring stuff that XRoar doesn't have. This is one of those things that I'm sure somebody's probably done a MAME MCP, but the nice thing about computer use with Codex is that, one, it can write its own. So one of the things it can do is write its own Lua code and connect to that Lua API, because it knows how to access MAME's Lua API interface, because it's either been trained on the documentation online, or it can go out and find it and ingest it. And two, it can also control any window in your computer if you want it to. That's the real power of the OpenAI's ChatGPT Codex application that is best in class right now. I think Claude Code has some limited functionality, but it's not nearly as sophisticated as what you can do with Codex, and it works really well, and it's not particularly onerous on your token usage. So essentially what it can do is it can launch the arcade emulator in MAME, connect to it and read what's going on in the memory, step through the code if it needs to, and input control, so it can actually control the Ladybug and run unit tests to determine behavior. So it can do things like screen capture to find out what the actual animation sequence is. It can actually determine the exact frame movement of a character like the Ladybug, so it can do an exact one-for-one arcade mapping. So between the Lua / MAME command line, so it uses a command line interface that can run PowerShell calls to run MAME through Ubuntu using the USL command. It can connect to the arcade machine, do an analysis, and either get screenshots or get timings or code information or memory dumps of whatever system it's trying to monitor. Then it can also fire up XRoar and load my custom ROM and do an output test to make sure that it's doing the exact one-for-one. And it can use that to troubleshoot. So that's been my workflow. I haven't even been looking at the assembly code. I don't know if that's shamefully at this point or not, but it's just the fact that I've got this powerful workflow that I just talk to the model, and the model can access the arcade emulator, the actual arcade hardware through emulator using MAME. It can build and deploy and access the Coco 3 through emulator using XRoar, putting in my actual arcade. And that's what we were looking at when I did the demo of the current game state. And other than that, all I've been doing is just working through the roadmap. And then if there's something, this was the other thing that I got it to do, which actually kind of accelerated things a bit too. So there's this open source tile map building tool that I've had experience with in the past when I was teaching some rudimentary video game web-based development for some of my graphic designers as a way to kind of teach them how to build HTML. And so there's an open source application called Tiles. Let me open that up for a second here. And that allows you to create tile-based maps, which this is just a CSV under the covers. It's just a comma separated. It's like a spreadsheet essentially. And you can import tiles. So you can see here, I've got two sets of tiles imported. There's these are 8x8 tiles, which are the actual background. So that's what this entire map is made of. And then there's the sprites, which these are 16x16, which I could also select one and put on the screen if I wanted to. But most of the time I'm using the tiles for this map. But, so the first thing that I think I got it to do, because I'm pretty sure I didn't build this, I got it to build a version of the actual arcade map, just as an example of what the map looks like. Using tiled was a really handy sort of shorthand, because it can access the files and it can even access the tiled application. It allowed me to speak in a very precise two-dimensional way about the layout of the application. And when I'm troubleshooting things, we have this tiled map as a very, as a sort of that translation layer between talking about how the game is performing versus what the code actually looks like. And in fact, I think it uses these, not this one. So like I said, so this is the arcade layout. And then I created a tile map. I started trying to create a version of this for reference, but I actually ended up, and I think had that open. Let me go back here for a second. So I asked if you're able to update the tile map with the correct tile values to match the screen capture. I just said I started building an empty tile map using the assets black and white tile sheet, but it is incomplete. So I had done it. I had done the sort of the outline border, and I'd started doing a few of the walls and gates, but I only got about like this part. And I asked it, are you able to update the tile map with the correct tile values to match the screen capture? If so, please go ahead. Then stage and commit all current changes. So it basically built this. The only thing it did wrong was it added a trailing comma, which was not a compatibility thing with tile, but I got it to fix that by just saying, hey, it said tile says this is a bad format, and realized, oh, there's a trailing comma. It's not supposed to be there. So it actually built this CSV, or a version of the CSV. It basically did the map, and then I went and grabbed the ones that I did. I basically built this by hand because I wanted this instead of, because there was no room for them up here. I basically did these on this side. So the stuff that was on top goes to the left, and the stuff that was on the bottom goes here. And then it basically used that to build the graphic screen. It's basically using this tile reference. And like I said, I know that it's doing this because when I make this change, I wanted to, so the one thing I was doing while I was kind of, before I started shooting this, was I added in, because the one thing I don't have that's in the arcade is the actual top score name that you can save, which I kind of showed you in the original arcade demo. So I wanted to add that line in here so that everything that is in the arcade is showing up here, and then I'll, in the arcade, it starts as universal, but there's not enough characters off that. That would be one limitation, that I'll only be able to do 7 characters as opposed to the 10 or so that I think the arcade supports, but that's fine. When most arcade games at this time only allowed 3 characters, a 7-character limit is perfectly fine. But when I made that change, my game didn't run, so it's obviously pulling from this tile, and the extra tiles that it needs for Ladybug exceeded the total number that I was expecting, and it caused an error, and it wouldn't actually run the game, so I had to revert it. But anyway, that'll be for a later time. Okay, back to this. So then, like I said, so once it did the tiled thing, and like I said, I got that error, so then it fixed it with this. I got stage commit the TRX repair and the HUD documentation changes, and it created a new screen map with the maze-centered placeholder graphics on both sides. Oh, I tried to get it to put the special extra in that in descending because I didn't think there'd be enough width for them, but there turns out that there was. Okay, so then I modified, that's where I modified the TX file, and then I told it just read the TMX file and update the game graphics to match that. So that's the third really magical part. So I've essentially can design the map in tiled, or even get it to assist me if I'm pulling graphics from an existing game, and then make the modifications that I want and say, hey, I've updated that tiled map. Make sure you bring that into the game. So now it's, like I said, I can design the map using a pretty neat tile editing tool that is as far as free resources go out there, it's one of the best game if you're doing 2D tile-based games anyway. It's a great way to do tile design, map design. And so it can basically take the stuff from the tiled file, pull either the content, whether it's graphics or behavior or sound, from the arcade MAME interface, and then I could even use MAME or XRoar to compile the ROM and install it into a Coco 3 in the emulator and test it all out. And it can do all that end to end, and I just have to direct it. So, like I said, this is fascinating as far as being able to do retro game design really easy and to let the machine do all of the heavy lifting. The models now, and I would say this only with Sol, and probably Fable. I haven't played with Fable because you have to pay for it, and they're only planning on making Fable available for, in fact, it may already be gone. They were going to cut off access to it at a fairly certain period of time for another indefinite outage window. Whereas Codex this is available and it's not going to go away. So I do know Fable, you might even get more favorable results if you use Fable. But I can't personally no experience with it, just again because I didn't want to spend the extra. It costs more. You get less usage out of the amount that you do pay for a weekly limit. And like I said, it's going away. So then you're back down to Opus 4.8, which is far worse than this new version of Codex. Oh, ChatGPT, sorry. Now, there is a rumor that, actually, Fable may not have gone away yet because I haven't heard anything about it. And there is a rumor that if they do take it away, they're going to bring in Opus 5. That'll be probably more similar to what ChatGPT 5.6 is. But anyway, I just have a fairly poor impression of the way Anthropic has been sort of managing their business, and some of it is due to just the fact that they don't have enough compute to be able to really serve their highest, most powerful models at the level that's something that OpenAI can with their largest models. And the other big thing about Fable versus ChatGPT 5.6 is that ChatGPT 5.6 is an evolution of an existing model. Fable and the Mythos model that it's based off of are a new class, a larger model. So it probably takes more compute. It's just fascinating that right now Fable and 5.6 Sol are kind of equal level. Some things Fable does better, some things Sol does better. And yeah, it's just kind of, like I said, I'm personally right now on the ChatGPT side of the fence. But that could change. These models are constantly evolving, and the right one to use is something that changes on a week-by-week basis at this point. Okay. So then I got interface with arrow key movement and Ladybug. So once I had a map getting rendered, then I started to add the controls for the Ladybug and be able to steer it around the maze. And again, feel free to pause this if you want. I'm not going to go into all because there's several days worth of work here. But basically, I got it to start do some tweaks to the graphics. And then I standardized on the color naming. There's a typo there, but that's okay. I got it so that I grabbed eyedroppers of the actual arcade colors. And so this is primarily targeting the RGB output for Coco 3. If you use the more traditional composite, I think is the output, you're going to get wonky colors that are not arcade perfect. And I haven't put any effort in trying to detect whether you're doing composite or RGB output and try and make color matches that are a little closer to the arcade for the composite. Right now, it's just using whatever the RGB values are and getting you some wonky colors. But this is targeting the RGB output. Okay, so then, this is basically all I've been doing is that from there I started doing the collectibles, and when you pick up the collectibles to light up the appropriate letters. And I ran into the XRoar and full screen slowdown issue, but don't worry about that. The demo I did was in a small window, so there's some performance tuning I need to do with XRoar on my installation to get it so it doesn't chunk at full screen, but it actually has been kind of beneficial in that I get a sort of a free slowed down version just by going full screen, so I can not just test at full speed, but I can actually test the game performance at a much cut speed. It's about 25% speed, I think, or so. So anyway, but yeah. All of this thing is, so at this point now, it's just basically I let it do some work. It updates the ROM. I rebuild the ROM and run it in the XRoar emulator, and I start playing with it. And if the things that I found, let's see, some of the common issues I had. One, the gate collision. At one point, I needed to be pixel perfect over the gate in order to get it to work. Otherwise, it would treat it like a wall. But if you play in the arcade, you can be, so if you're right in the middle, it won't move. But if you move over a little bit, it'll actually shove you over into the spot. That's exactly arcade behavior. And that was something I was having trouble getting it to do until I told it, go and test this out for all 20 gates in the arcade and figure it out. And so now I think it's actually pretty much arcade perfect. So like you can move the gates back and forth pretty easily. Like I said, I think there's probably a couple of obscure edge cases that's not right, but it's almost perfect. Yeah. And the timing of how fast the timer goes, that's something that I can get it to. This is matching the level 1 arcade, like part 1 identically. So I don't have it speeding up when you increase level difficulty, things like that. But those are all polished now, pretty much. The big part has been just getting this so that it actually behaves like the arcade. I can pick up the dots. I can do the special extra and multipliers based on the color. So the color rotation is happening all based on the actual arcade time, so that it stays on blue, I think, for 7 seconds. It stays on yellow for about 3.5 seconds, and then it stays on red for half a second. And that timer, like I said, I knew based on some facts and manuals that I found online roughly what the value was, but I got it to go on a MAME and do the test to actually record the exact timing for each of those 3 color shifts, and then it's matching it. So that's the real power. That if I was doing this all manually, unless I disassembled the code and stepped through line by line, or built my own Lua code to do those tests myself, I'd always be sort of eyeballing things. And the fact that I can get it to write the test to verify what the arcade actual behavior is, and then implement that exactly into the code for the cartridge, and then test it and verify. It's amazing. It totally changes the ability to do this type of thing. So, like I said, I think I can probably get Ladybug, the arcade game, done by another couple of days worth of effort, and I'll get pretty close, if not exactly 100%. So I think that's about all I want to do. That was a big dump. But like I said, it's just, even now where I'm at this point now where I've been kind of letting things off, is I'm just, mostly I'm just listing out, like I talk about, like I was having a problem with the sprites flickering. So I said, I just give it a description of what it's doing, and I can also describe bugs. There's a new bug where anytime a Ladybug travels to the left, it leaves behind this red smear trail. Also, on the last life, the Ladybug traveled off the screen but did not reappear where it was supposed to walk up to start position in the maze. So the position of the Ladybug and where the software thought it was were out of alignment. And I just describe what I see in plain, precise English as best I can of what the bug is and how to reproduce it. And it goes and tests it, and it can do screenshots and verify that, oh yeah, this is why. And so it's really good. Sol in particular, especially at medium effort, extremely good. Even light does work most of the time, but light is it's the lowest level of reasoning, and light is the Sol on light, I have had occasional times where it just goes off the rails and completely screws up. So if I was suggesting you wanted to use Sol, I would probably start on medium until you've got your process down and your conventions and your development process all in place. Then back off to light and see how it does. If you get bad results, you can always go back up to medium and try again. And same thing with medium. If medium's not getting the results that you're looking for, try bumping up to high and see what sort of a result you get. But if you are trying to be token efficient, especially if you're on the cheapest plan, if you're paying the $100 or $200 US a month to get the 5 or 10, 20 times token use, you're probably not going to blow into your limits, and you could just keep it on medium or keep it on high and you'll be happy. But I think that's all I wanted to say for today. I will end this here and go to my second video, which will be on my other channel, my Modern Democracy channel. So if you would like to get a little more in depth into the actual how the back end works, there'll be a short video on my Modern Democracy channel. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.